Hello, my name's Max, and I'm creating this video with the intention of the highest good for all. Not only that, but I'm creating it with an intention of collaboration and of connection and of relationship, and not of divisiveness. My hope is that after this video, all of us will continue doing everything that we can, everything that is within our power and our wisdom, to support the health and well-being of our communities and ourselves. So the topic of this video that I wanted to speak with you about is adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccination. And I'm mostly going to be speaking from my personal experience. And my personal experience is that following COVID-19 vaccination, I had multiple minor strokes. In this video, I'll explain the mechanism of this. And so first, to give you a primer, I need to explain the way that mRNA vaccines are designed to work. So for those, the way that they're designed is that when they're injected into your arm, the mRNA instructions, which tell your cells how to produce a spike protein, those are in a small package, essentially. That package gains entry into your cells and deposits the mRNA instructions. From there, your cells get to work in producing the spike proteins using those mRNA instructions. So the mRNA instructions, they'll disappear from your system. I've seen estimates from a few hours to a few days, but it's relatively quick. Once the spike proteins are produced, there's a few mechanisms that they have to encounter your immune system and invoke an immune response. Much of the spike proteins are supposed to stay either in your cell or on the surface of your cell, and some will end up circulating through your system. Regardless of where they are, the idea being is that your immune system picks them up. Oftentimes they're transported to your lymphatic system, and then from there, antibodies are produced. So if the spike protein remained on the surface of your cell or within your cell, we wouldn't be so bad off. From there, your immune system would identify the spike protein, neutralize it, and eventually your adaptive immune system would create antibodies that prepares you for fighting the COVID-19 virus, which is exactly what this whole process was designed for in the first place. However, what we're finding is that the spike protein actually is flowing through the circulatory system more than we originally anticipated. And the problem with this is that the spike protein itself is cytotoxic. What that means is that it can damage your cells. In the case of the COVID-19 virus, it uses the spike proteins on its surface to damage your cells and gain access to them. In the case of free-floating spike proteins in your circulatory system, it just causes damage. And what we found by studying COVID-19 is that it has a greater likelihood of damaging nerve cells, cells in your circulatory system, cells in your heart, and elsewhere too. Now the thing is as well is that while we're finding that COVID-19, the virus, that it cannot pass the blood-brain barrier, or at least has a very difficult time passing the blood-brain barrier, unlike that, the spike proteins can pass the blood-brain barrier. And what we're seeing now is that in some cases, following vaccination, people are experiencing symptoms that have varying degrees of severity and will last sometimes weeks or longer. And what the concern is that these symptoms may be precipitated by physical damage from spike proteins. However, because these symptoms have onset shortly after vaccination sometimes, it can be difficult to isolate exactly what's causing them. The vaccines have multiple constituent pieces, all designed to make the vaccines work the way that they're supposed to. And when you have exposure to all of those and then symptoms shortly afterwards, it can be difficult to isolate exactly which ones are related to your symptoms. Additionally, especially at times of initial exposure, your immune response can sometimes result in negative symptoms that you would experience. My case, however, is somewhat fortuitous, because even though, of course, my symptoms were not positive, the the reality is that the sequence of events in my case are actually very good at isolating the spike proteins as the cause of my injury. So in my case, basically what it was is that after I got the shot, within the first 24 hours, I was doing pretty fine. I felt a little bit off, maybe a little bit dizzy, a little bit slower, but overall it was fine. Those symptoms cleared within 24 hours. However, there was an additional symptom which continued, and this was a slight pressure in my arm at the site of injection, as well as a slight numbness in the rest of my arm. So this continued on, and after 3 weeks of having this pressure and slight numbness continue, I decided that I was going to massage the site of injection to see if I could relieve that pressure. About 45 minutes after I did that, though, I began to have symptoms of COVID-19 vaccination, namely swelling around my lymph nodes. And within 36 hours, this had progressed to difficulty breathing and chest pain. So I called the nursing line, which in British Columbia is the non-emergency medical line, and they recommended that I go to the emergency room, and so I did. And when I was there, another symptom that began to develop was numbness in my right side. So from there, over the next few days, I had additional symptoms develop as well. This was cognitive impairment, euphoria, some difficulty with spatial awareness. All of this points very strongly to left hemisphere stroke, and I went to the emergency a couple times as well. My doctors suspected that I had stroke based on the symptoms that I was describing, and they put me through the various tests for this. They also prescribed me ibuprofen. Now, ibuprofen is designed to be helpful, or I shouldn't say it's designed to be helpful, but it's shown to be helpful in cases of ischemic stroke. So that's stroke caused by a blood clot. So the thing is, though, is that a couple days into my symptoms, when I took it, I actually began to develop numbness on the left side of my body. And I did some more digging into this, and it turns out that ibuprofen is actually a risk factor for hemorrhagic stroke, which is a stroke caused by a hemorrhage or bleeding in the brain. So all of this leads me to believe that although we have our attention right now on blood clots, because indeed the previous AstraZeneca vaccine was shown to have a small, very small likelihood of producing blood clots in people, I think that what is happening now is that these spike proteins are actually resulting in hemorrhage in people, as it is with me. At least that seems to be the anecdotal evidence from my experience with the ibuprofen. So, of course, I don't want to rule out blood clots. Later in this video, I'm going to link some names of researchers who are looking into the negative side effects of vaccination. This list is not conclusive. I'm sure there's more people who are looking into it than just this, but it's at least a starting point for you to have a look. So to connect the dots here, I mentioned before that my case was a good illustration of the injury that the spike proteins can cause because my situation isolated them. So my suspicion is that after about 3 weeks, my body likely would have either already experienced whatever negative effects it was going to experience from the other constituent pieces of the vaccine and may very well have filtered some of those parts out of my system already. So what I believe happened is, just like when I was describing before, that the spike proteins come to rest on the surface of the cell or inside the cell, I believe that massaging out the site of injection in my case caused a widespread circulation of the spike proteins in my system, and then the development of the symptoms that I described through actual physical injury to my tissue. So closer to the start of all this happening, I was put through a CT scan. This was before I had a headache develop. And that CT scan, my doctors weren't able to find anything on it. That being said, what I have seen from speaking with medical staff and from doing my own research online is that CT scans they won't always capture a stroke, particularly if it's minor or if it's at the beginning stages. And because I developed headache afterwards, it's probably fair to say that as severe as my stroke was going to get, and again, it was quite minor, but as severe as it was going to get, the CT scan wasn't done at the peak of that severity. So that's a factor that we're playing with. Nonetheless, all the symptoms that I experienced very much pointed towards stroke. All said, I'm sure I'll recover. At this point, I'm about 2 weeks out from the time that I rubbed my arm, and I still have some symptoms. I have numbness on the right side of my body still. I still have some degree of headache and some degree of difficulty with endurance and performance in some types of cognitive tasks. To use the analogy of a hamster running a wheel, it appears that the hamster is still alive. Pardon me, but it can take a little while longer to get going, and it needs more breaks than it normally would. So although it appears that I sustained a small degree of brain damage, I'm taking lots of supplements, I'm constantly practicing, and I suspect within a few weeks to a few months I'll have the regular functionality and level of comfort in my body that I'm accustomed to. One thing that is still ongoing, which is perhaps a little bit more disturbing, is that I still have chest pain that came up from all this. So I'll be continuing to look into that and keeping a pace of the ongoing research and being in touch with my healthcare providers to see what the best approaches are for me to take in overcoming that hurdle. So that being said, the problem is that this even happened in the first place. Right now, I don't believe that we have adequate attention on the damaging nature of spike proteins. And my hope is that our public health people and our policy people will take a further look into this and really, really consider it in terms of the initiatives that governments are putting forward. My hope as well is that people who do experience adverse effects from vaccination get more of a voice, because right now I don't know that they're being well represented based on the numbers of people for whom this is happening. So what I'll do now is I'll put some names up of doctors and researchers who are looking at the negative side effects of vaccines that we're discovering. And this list is not exhaustive or conclusive, as I mentioned earlier in the video, but it's at least a good starting point for you to take a look and see what we're finding. So all of this said, regardless of your stance on vaccination, a piece of non-contentious advice that I have to offer you, or at least what I hope is non-contentious, is look after your health. Eat well, sleep well, treat yourself well, because no doubt these actions will increase your immune capacity. Beyond this, love your neighbors and have compassion. Be mindful of social distancing as a thing. Again, regardless of your stance on vaccines, the reality is that if you can't breathe on someone, you can't spread whatever you've got. So that's something to consider. And then for that compassionate piece, also extend that to people who don't agree with you. Like, we are in such a wild ride right now as a collective, and the last thing that we need is more divisiveness. My hope truly is that in sharing this video, it is just another piece of the puzzle for our mass collective efforts right now, and I am releasing this video with the deepest prayer from my heart that we are all able to really come together and pursue our collective well-being and the beauty that I know humanity is capable of. The last thing I want to say is honor your instinct. Right now, there's a lot going on that intellectually I think we're still figuring out. But that being said, for myself and for others in my community, and even people beyond my community, what I've noticed is a strong intuitive no to all this. Speaking for myself, I'm very invested in making positive contributions to the world, and I saw that with the passports coming in and potentially other social restrictions, that my ability to make those positive contributions would be stifled. So that was a big contributing factor for the course of action that I took. That being said, I think that what my circumstance illustrates quite well is that there are dangers associated with vaccination that we don't have as much attention on as we should. And so my encouragement and my validation for you, if you are feeling icky or off about this, is to honor that feeling. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch and to listen. I wish you and your relations and your community all the best. Take care.